Hi everyone, let's talk about combat scenes, about fight scenes in literature, mostly in fiction, and really mostly in fantasy literature, because that's where these long drawn, like page after page action, these fight scenes, that's really a staple in fantasy literature, and it pretty much bores me 100% of the time. There are exceptions. Lord of the Rings is an exception. I mean, I'll obviously skip over the songs. I've talked about that in the past. I can't stand the songs. But the fight scenes, I feel like Tolkien did a really good job with. But the greatest exception of all time to my rule of the longer it is, the worse it is, that which we'll call just like my principle of fight scenes, is the cliff top of insanity in The Princess Bride. Goldman, I mean, it is spectacular, the way he wrote this, but it's an outlier to my principle. And I'm going to read what I think is an even better fight scene than that. It's in Princess Bride, and I think it's the best fight scene in at least fiction, if not everything. Doesn't have to just be fantasy literature. Okay. It took a full 3 minutes for the Count and the guards to reach the gate. And when they did, the Count could not believe it. He had seen Wesley killed, and now there was Wesley, and with a giant and a strangely scarred, swarthy fellow. Something about the twin scars banked deep into his memory. But now was not the time for reminiscing. Kill them, he said to the fencers, but leave the middle-sized one until I tell you. And the 4 guards drew their swords. But too late and too slow, because as Fezzik moved in front of Wesley, Inigo attacked, the great blade blinding, and the 4th guard was dead before the first one had sufficient time to hit the floor. Inigo stood still a moment, panting. Then he made half a turn in the direction of Count Rugen, and executed a quick and well-formed bow. Hello, he said. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Oh, that's so good. Like after that, there's like the equivalent of a car chase. There's this little chase scene, and then another fight, which isn't nearly as good. It's a little bit too long. It's not nearly as good. But that line, the 4th, not that you killed my father, but that's fine. That one's good too. But the fight line of the 4th fencer, was dead before the first one had sufficient time to hit the floor. That's as good as it gets. I mean, that's like the bones of a fight. You hang up a Christmas tree in your living room, and it's perfectly formed, and it just allows the reader's imagination to decorate that tree however they want. You don't know what the sword, you don't know every drop of blood, you don't know you don't know anything about the details, but your imagination fills that. When I read that for the first time, I reread it immediately. I mean, I was a kid, and I got to the end, whoa, and I just read that path. I mean, it's a third of a page, and it's so good. And I'm not the first person to notice how good that is. Other writers have like co-opted, sort of like borrowed William Goldman's line. There's a writer I really like, Evan Winter, and in his book, like The Adventures of Tao in Demonland, Rage of Dragons, Evan Winter is so good with prose, right? His descriptions and his control of language are so good that I love it, even though his entire book is like one big fight. It's the John Wick of fantasy literature. It's one big fight scene, and yet I like it. My only complaint, at least that comes to mind, is multiple borrowings of that line. He sort of didn't do the work of condensing his fight scenes on his own. But even William Goldman himself, that the line existed in some form, some mutation before William Goldman. I mean, like asleep before your head hit the pillow, or there's iterations of that line that predate William Goldman's employment of it in fantasy literature. But I really think that's the best lean, like MLT, like Billy Crystal's Mutton, Lettuce, and Tomato lean, the leanest writing that lets the reader's imagination do the heavy lifting. And that's really what fight scenes, I think that's more than what fight scenes in fantasy literature should be. I mean, that's like fight scenes in real, like sports. If we're going to talk about sports, nobody rewatches. I mean, remember, I reread this line as a kid immediately with goosebumps. I mean, I had like the chills rereading this. Like, nobody's going to do that with a 3-hour sport. Nobody's going to like watch the Super Bowl and like, let's start over and just watch like reruns of 3-hour event. Nobody watches that stuff. Highlight reels, yes. People will watch a highlight reel, but not like a 3-hour sporting event. And I think even the first time, not like, let's rewatch this over and over in the way that I like to reread books over. I mean, The Princess Bride, Name of the Wind, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, obviously. I've reread these a ton of times in life. And in the first time reading something, there's actually a good one, a pretty good, it wasn't this good, but it was pretty good. And I think it was A Wise Man's Fear, where it was a brief description of the fight. And they said, all of this happened in less time than it took to describe it. It was a nice little line that Rothfuss had. But even watching a real sport for the first time, I think a highlight reel is probably better. And the example I'm going to go with is Mike Tyson, who's just a living highlight reel. These early fights, later fights, there's a different story to be told about what's happening in the ring. But early Mike Tyson fights, it was like a double-digit number of fights where he didn't even get hit. In his professional debut, I don't know how many fights you go before anyone ever actually hit him. And these 30-second fights will go, oh, he hit really hard. No, they were beautiful. These were beautiful, perfect fights. They were every step, every movement. Watch his head move and the dodging and waiting for the opportunity and hitting. Oh, they're so beautiful. You can rewatch those early Mike Tyson fights 100 times and not be bored. I think those are the best combat scenes. Those are comparable to what William Goldman wrote. They're just the real life equivalent of William Goldman's passage there. And like you could say, like, what's the best boxing match of all time? Oh, it's a Rumble in the Jungle. But like, sure, okay, Foreman was favored to win that by 4-1 or something like that. And the 8th round was pretty impressive and surprising, and the uproar. Sure, we can make arguments about how the Rumble in the Jungle is, the great fight scene of all time or something. But I don't think that's really true. I think what people are doing is, like, the people who argue this is the greatest combat of all, did they even watch the first 7 rounds? Let alone watch the first 7 rounds 10 times and be like, look at all. I think they're just thinking about the 8th round and the highlight reel of it and saying, like, that's the pinnacle. And so I don't think that longer fights correspond to better fights. And we should all do our part for, like, the Tysonization. Like, so in Mike Tyson in 1995, talking about how powerful this stuff is and the economy of words here. This was the summer between 8th and 9th grade. So I was out of middle school. I was about to become a freshman in high school. And I went over to my friend John's house and we had the pay-per-view for the Peter McNeely fight. So Tyson's first post-prison round that he was going to fight. And like, I donate my, childhood life savings to the cost of this thing. And 90 seconds into the first round, it's over. 90 seconds. He'd already knocked down Peter McNeely twice. And yeah, we can argue. I think everyone probably would argue, except for maybe like Peter McNeely and his family, that it was called too soon. He definitely could have kept going, but it was 2 knockdowns in 90 seconds. That was not going to go a whole round. That fight was not going to go a whole round. And had it gone 10 rounds, I don't think it would have been worth the cost. But oh man, every penny of it was worth it for me. Even back then, back in the 8th grade, I understood. Maybe I couldn't express it in the vocabulary I do today, but I understood the economy here. That the fight was over, before the first bell has tolled, to put it into like William Goldman terms. And that's what made it worth it. And again, 10 rounds, I don't think it would have been worth the cost. And that may sound, hyperbolic or whatever, but think about it from the perspective of like Halloween and trick-or-treating and candy. Okay, you go door to door and you get candy and whatever. Let's say candy has 10 grams of sugar in it, just standardized candy as 10 grams of sugar. Now, if you get those 10 grams of sugar in like half a bite, half a round of the Mike Tyson fight, that's so sweet and like that's real candy. If it takes 10 bites to get the 10 grams of sugar, that's like as sweet as milk is. And go ahead, just hang out. Don't even put that in my bag. If I'm going trick-or-treating, don't even put the like milk candy in my bag. I don't want that, And so I think a lean, action-packed William Goldman Tyson-esque action scene is as good as it gets. That's worth every word. That's worth every dollar of pay-per-view. And I work hard for the Tysonization of my own combat scenes. Maybe they start off as 10 rounds. Maybe they start off as page after page. But I work on them, condense them. The condensed milk of my fights until Tyson very well could have been a protagonist in that fight. But I never just borrow a line from a legend to do the hard work for me, of sort of shirking the responsibility of my own highlight summarization. But okay, that's it. I hope all of your action, whether it's sports or whatever action you have in life, is like sugar packed, and your diet is not packed with sugar. Sugar belongs in action, not in your mouth. But that's what I hope, and I will see you next time. Bye.